So, hello, I'm Brian Armentrout with the Food Leadership Group, and today it's my pleasure here on episode 1 of my video podcast to talk with Mr. Martin Hahn, partner at the law firm of Hogan Lovells. Martin, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm not used to being called Mr. Martin Hahn, though. So the formality is caught me off guard there.
Yeah, it is a little formal, isn't it? So we'll keep it a little less formal here moving forward. So Martin, as I said, is with the law firm of Hogan Lovells, based in Washington, D.C. Martin and I have known each other for, how long? Probably going on 10 years now?
I would have said 10 or 15.
Yeah, and he's one of the leading experts out there with food safety. Most of the food industry, the larger companies out there, go to this guy when they're really wanting to figure out what's the right way to approach new food safety laws and regulations and things are going on. So I'm really happy to be able to sit down and talk with Martin today.
Well, I'm happy to be here as well, Brian, and with my background in food science and technology from The Ohio State University, it makes me uniquely qualified to understand some of the challenges that people are facing. It also, given the fact that many of my jobs throughout high school and college were in the food industry, where I was working in pork slaughterhouses, also working in plants where they were making hamburger, I know firsthand what it's like to be in the work food processing environment and some of the challenges that you may face when you're trying to tell a 19-year-old, such as myself, several decades ago, what needs to be done. So it does give me a unique perspective.
Oh, absolutely. And so I appreciate that because, getting these things actually done in the plants is a lot more difficult than actually just understanding what the law says. So that's a very good perspective. Of course, the biggest thing that has impacted everyone in the food industry is the Food Safety Modernization Act. The law went into effect in 2011. It's now reaching the point where these things are actually being implemented. So if you're a larger company, you have until September of 2016 to have everything in place. Smaller companies have a little bit more time. Now, what I've been seeing out there, Martin, is that larger companies who have access to experts such as yourself have a pretty clear roadmap on what it is that they need to do for implementation of the programs, like you had said too, at the plant level. What I'm seeing out there is medium and smaller companies aren't quite sure what they need to do. So what I kind of wanted to chat with you here about today was, based upon what you're seeing on how these things are unfolding, if you were a quality manager or an executive in a medium to smaller food company and you had to put this in place, what would you focus on?
Well, we actually do work for not only the largest companies in the food industry, but some of the smaller companies as well.
Good.
And you're absolutely right. The challenges confronting the small companies are in much more complicated in large part because of their resources. This is a labor-intensive statute, and it's really a deal changer in terms of how the industry is going to have to start coming up and complying with these new regulations. And so much of the regulations are based on paperwork, making certain you have the records in place, that your employees are keeping track of those records. And that requires a lot of training, and it is a struggle for the smaller companies. I do think, though, go ahead.
Oh, as I say, that's a really good point because you got some wheels turning here in my head around, we keep hearing the mantra of, if you don't document it, it didn't happen. And that's a perfect example of that.
Absolutely. If you didn't document, it didn't happen, because FDA is going to change their focus from kind of the scratch and sniff inspections of the past, where they would walk around the facility, they would try to observe what was taking place in the facility at that time. They would identify food safety practices, whether it be grip condensation on the ceilings or flaky paint or just overall poor sanitation. But it was a visually focused inspection. We're going from that to a paperwork inspection where FDA will come in. Yes, we will expect the agency to go out and actually tour through the facility, but I wouldn't be surprised if next to somewhere between 70 to 80% of the agency's inspection time is actually spent looking at records in a conference room in the country or in the company. And so that's going to be a deal changer, and that's why it is going to be so incredibly important that you do have those employees taking those records and making certain they're documented, because if the record doesn't exist, as far as FDA is concerned, that product was not produced safely, it's adulterated, and they will take action accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the really positive steps that the FDA has taken in the implementation in this is reaching out to industry and going through training programs that industry is going through as well. So FDA inspectors are sitting side by side in classes going over the same material on how to evaluate food safety programs as the people who are implementing them.
And those training programs are incredibly valuable, and I give FDA a lot of credit for preparing those programs. I also am telling companies, whether they're large or small, make certain that you go through one of those preventive controls, qualified individuals, training programs. The acronym is PCQI, another crazy acronym you have to remember, but it's going to be so important when FDA is looking at your food safety plan to be able to say, yes, it was prepared by an individual within the company or multiple individuals within the company who did the PCQI training. So I really am encouraging people to go. One of the frustrating things that I've noticed about the training, though, is there's almost a one-size-fits-all approach, and I'm afraid that the agency may be coming out, or some of the course materials may suggest that there's much less flexibility with regard to how you would address certain hazards that require preventive control than perhaps which is necessary. And one of the things that comes to mind is pesticide residues, where the agency in the training module identified pesticides as residues that hazard that requires preventive control. I'm not quite certain whether that really is an appropriate emphasis when you look at the probability and the type of harm that could occur through pesticide residues. I'm not quite certain that that's an example of a hazard that requires a preventive control. But the fact that it's been incorporated in the training module indicates that when inspectors are going out into the plants, that's likely how they're going to be viewing it.
Well, that's an interesting observation as well, Martin, because that's kind of where different regulations start to overlap. So Proposition 65 in California, for example, where you may have things that are required underneath that section of the law that FSMA may look at a little differently. So that's those little nuances within the system. I think we're all going to have to figure out how we're going to deal with those.
That's absolutely crucial. And I think right now, in terms of what small companies should be doing, you should be focusing on a couple of key aspects. One, recognize that you have been producing safe food for however long you've been in business. And so try to find how you can design your food safety in a program in a way that's going to capture all the good food safety practices that you have in place. But think through it carefully. You do need to have somebody experienced looking at what are those hazards that require preventive control within your facility, what controls you have in place, and then design record keeping. Design your critical limits, whatever you want to call them, in a way that you can, in fact, record and make certain that you make these records as simple as possible. They need to be constantly recorded at the time that they are generated, and so you can't have a record that requires your employees to go through and have these very complex boxes that have to be checked or long narratives. Try to find ways to make this as simple as possible.
That's a really, really good point, Martin. A lot of times what I talk with my clients is complex is easy. It's very easy to write a form with all kinds of information on it. It's much more difficult to create something that's elegant and simple where you're really zooming in on what are the important things that I need to be controlling. When I'm receiving ingredients, what are those things on the certificate of analysis that need to be reviewed? And importantly, and this gets back to the documentation piece, where that if it wasn't done and documented, it didn't happen, what do you then do about that? So the old, within quality assurance, plan, do, check, act model. So what is it? How do you document it? How do you make sure it's correct? And what do you do if it's not? Because that's the pattern that FDA is going to follow when they look at that documentation.
That is absolutely right. And as part of your food safety plan, you have to have the corrective action in place to make certain that that identify what happens when you receive a material that doesn't have a COA. Or if a COA comes in and it shows that it's out of spec and that is a hazard that requires preventive control, that product should be either rejected or reconditioned. Some corrective action needs to be taken, and you need to have documentation that that corrective action was in fact implemented.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, FDA is not expecting us to be perfect, but what they're expecting us to do is if something does happen, that we react to it.
Absolutely. Which then leads me to my second recommendation for small companies right now, and it goes to what you were talking about in terms of receiving certificates of analysis from your vendors. Whether you're a large or small company, one of the most challenges about FSMA is your supplier verification. And the reason that it is such a challenge is you need to do your hazard analysis, your safety assessment on an ingredient by ingredient basis. You need to have somebody with familiarity to know what are potential hazards that may be associated with an ingredient and whether they rise to the level of a hazard that requires a preventive control. And then to just further complicate the issue, you also need to do that assessment on a facility by facility basis. Let's say you're sourcing flour from 10 different mills. You need to see what each one of those mills is doing, for example, to control undeclared allergens in the event they're milling multiple types of grain. Yeah. And so you not only look at the ingredient, but then you need to look at each one of those processing facilities. And that's where the complexity is really coming into play. And I don't care if you're a small company or a large company, supplier verification has been one of the biggest challenges and game changers with regard to FSMA.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, one of the mistakes that was made in the past, especially with smaller companies, is if they were buying materials through brokers, they would often rely on the broker. Now, under FSMA, brokers have a lot more responsibility, but you still need, to your point, get back to those sources. Where does that material originate from, and how do they control their hazards?
Absolutely, and that's where I also am encouraging companies to spend their time. Take advantage if you are part of a trade association. In many instances, trade associations are trying to help their members identify what are the hazards that they have, what are the hazards that require a preventive control, not only with regard to the products that are represented by that association, but also with regard to the ingredients. There's a lot of training programs that are out there and available, a lot of great resources, including people like you, Brian, that can serve as a tremendous resource to help people get their food safety plans into place.
Yeah, that's an important point, Martin, is that a lot of times when you're sitting in a production facility or at a corporate headquarters and you're the quality manager or you're working in procurement or something like that, and you don't know where to start, is to remember that everybody else is going through this as well. So there's valuable resources such as yourself and Hogan Lovells and trade associations and other individuals out there who've been through this who can help you out. So just always reach out and ask those questions, and a lot of times you're going to find those answers pretty quickly.
That's absolutely right. And also recognize that FDA has signaled that they recognize that this is a fundamental shift in terms of how the industry is going to be regulated. And the agency has signaled that they intend to at least initially do their inspections with, let's say, a soft hand rather than a hard hand. And when I say that, yes, they're going to come in, they will identify areas in which they may find deficiencies, but I don't expect the agency to be telling a company, okay, these deficiencies are so significant, we're going to suspend your registration. The agency will expect, though, after that first inspection, when they come back, that they see that the companies have, in fact, been taking the observations seriously. So I think it's important that at least out of the starting gates, you do your best to come up with the best food safety plan that's possible. It's just hard for me to say, but we should not be looking for an A game here. A C game is perfectly acceptable. And it's hard to say because having gone through high school and college and law school where grades were always such a strong driving force, I think sometimes, and particularly when you have such a fundamental shift as this, you want to do a good job. It doesn't have to be the perfect plan right now, but it has to be a plan that can demonstrate to the agency when they do come into your facility that you've thought about it, you've identified those hazards that really do require preventive control. You've got the preventive controls in place to address those hazards, you have the record keeping, you have the verification, you have the validation, you have the corrective actions, and you're able to walk the agency through all the records that you're keeping. It may not be perfect, but quite frankly, what we should be striving for right now is good enough, and focus your time and resources on those true food safety issues that are presented by whatever product you're making.
Yeah, good point. I think that'll relieve a lot of stress from people hearing that. I think definitely. So kind of in summary then, when I'm hearing this, so number one, my main recommendation is, and make sure that you agree with this as well, Martin, is that get to a training class. There's tons of PCQI training classes that are out there. Go out there and get that training, get an understanding of how this is different, because what FDA is expecting for your food safety plan versus what was expected for with your HACCP plans is different. So you need to understand that so you can start building out these systems. Then to your point, Martin, which is putting those preventative controls in place, which are reasonable and control your process, because to your point earlier, you're already producing a good product. Start showing FDA how that is that you do that through your food safety plan and how your preventative controls do that. Make sure and look at those areas that are potential areas that are weaknesses, such as supplier approval. And all companies are struggling with this because the larger you are, all that means is you have more suppliers. So it becomes just as difficult for large companies to control this as smaller ones as well. So doing those type of activities, you're on the right track. And final point on that is, don't forget you're not alone. There's people out there who can help you with this.
Absolutely. And remember, this is not a sprint. It's a marathon. It's going to take time, and do all the things that you identified. That's how we're going to make certain that whether you're a small company or a large company, when FSMA becomes operational for you, you can in fact be prepared and take advantage, as you said, of the resources that are out there.
Absolutely. So Martin, if someone wanted to reach out to you and had some additional questions, what would be a good way to get a hold of you?
Best way to do so would be through my email. I can easily be found at the Hogan Lovells website. It's martin.hahn@hoganlovells.com. You will find all my contact information there, as well as my direct dial number, as well as my email. But email, quite frankly, is the best way to reach me.
Oh yeah, so yeah, Martin responds to my emails at ridiculous times. And your last name is spelled H-A-H-N, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, great. And my name is Brian Armentrout with the Food Leadership Group. I'm the general manager here over at the company. And the best way to reach me is through our website, foodleadershipgroup.com, and fire me over an email. And thanks, Martin. I really appreciate your time. I think this is going to provide some really, really helpful information for people out there who are not quite sure where to get going.
Well, I certainly hope so. Thank you, Brian.
All right, we'll talk to you later.
Yep, take care. Bye-bye.